Hello, my name's Maddy, and if you're new to my channel, I love sewing, traveling, and eating food all over the world. And today, I'm going to show you how I made a Snow White inspired masquerade ball dress. For a little bit about me, I live in Germany. I've been living here for about a year. And so with that comes the opportunity to do a ton of traveling. And so my family and I, for the most part, have taken the largest amount of opportunities possible to get to as many countries before we end up moving. Last year, I got the chance to go to Italy, and it is one of my favorite places I've ever been to. One place that has a very special place in my heart is Venice, and I never thought that I would like Venice as much as I did, but I did. And so I'm a history nerd, and I did a lot of research while I was in Venice last year, and one of the things that absolutely caught my eye is masquerade ball dresses. Now, for me, ever since I was little, I've loved Disney princesses. I've loved any character that's had a big poofy ball gown. And so I haven't actually had the chance to make one myself. And so this is a whole new experience for me. And I wanted to try my hand because we were going back to Italy, and specifically we're going back to Venice to make a masquerade ball dress. Unintentionally, I completely gathered a ton of materials that would exactly replicate a Snow White dress. So here is some of the inspiration I was originally looking at, because once I realized how much material I had gathered in those specific colors, I looked into making just a normal Snow White dress, or like my version of a Snow White dress, but I still wanted to make a masquerade ball dress. So in the long run, I ended up kind of meshing the two ideas together, and that's how this video came about.
So like I said at the beginning, I had originally intended to make a masquerade ball dress, but in the process I had gathered materials that were more suited towards a Snow White costume. So taking this into account, I decided to draw two designs. One was based on the historical Germanic style that you see here, and the other one was based on the masquerade ball costume. Now, the masquerade ball costume era I chose is inspired mainly by the Victorian era. However, it also has some themes from the 17th century. In the end, I went with this design and kept the traditional gusset sleeves like you see in the original Snow White costume. I also included some sleeve drapes, and I decided to add some side drapes as well. Finally, I decided to add some decorations to the top of the bodice just to add some extra flair, and instead of doing a ruff around the neck, I added a layer of lace around the collar instead. Let's get started! So for the sleeve, I ended up using two different materials. I ended up using a curtain-like material that looks like this for the blue portion, and I ended up using a really solid velvet from these leftover pillowcases for the red portion. Now, the Snow White sleeve is notorious for its red gussets, and those are the teardrop looking thingies that sit in between the blue portion of the sleeve. So what I did end up doing was cut out the basic sleeve pattern using the curtain material, and then from there I cut several vertical slits 2 to 3 inches apart. After this, I measured out about 4-inch strips from the red velveteen. Once I finished measuring, I went ahead and cut these strips out. And then I trimmed the strips to measure the heights of the sleeve. Now that I've cut out all these pieces, I'm going to go ahead and sew them together. So now I'm going to sew these gussets together. So this is what the current sleeve looks like, but these are all the gussets sewn. And now I'm going to get the second sleeve done. Now that I finished the top of the sleeve, I'm going to go ahead and work on the ruffle. And I decided to make this out of the sheer curtain. The sleeves are meant to hang down to the middle of your wrist, so they look very swooshy. And the best way I can describe it is the circle skirt for your arm. Okay, so for the ruffle, because the sleeve ended up being slightly tighter than I wanted it to be, I decided to add a little bit more around the ruffle so I can have more space for my arm. Here are the pieces cut out. And I decided to layer these with some beautiful embroidered lace. Now, once I had cut all those pieces out, I went ahead and sewed the sheer paneling pieces together, and then I put the lace on top, hemmed all of it together, And then finally I added it to the base of the puffy sleeve. So once that was done, I decided to use these old curtain pulls and sew those on.
Here are both sleeves completed. Now I am going to sew the sides together and then I'm going to start working on the bodice.
Here's the finished sleeves. Now let's go get started on the bodice.
I think before we go any further, we should address all the elephants in the room. Hello, how's your day going? Nice to see you again. You're looking amazing today. Now that we've addressed all the elephants in the room, you're probably wondering what happened to my hair. I wanted to cut my hair for a long time. I thought it would be perfect to cut my hair around the time I was making this costume, so it would kind of fit the Snow White character a little bit more. That's pretty much it. So, now that we've addressed all the elephants in the room, I think it's time for us to get back to sewing.
The bodice by far took the longest in this entire project. Now for the bodice, I divided it into 4 different portions. So we have the lining, we have the interfacing, we have the overlay or outer material, and then we have the boning and structuring portion. Now for the lining, it was fairly simple. I just cut all the pieces out. Now if you look at the pattern, I had them all laid out, so I'm not going to describe it too much, but you know, side backs go to back, side fronts go to side backs, and then you sew the side front to the center front. Here's the finished lining. Now I added a mixture of uncased and cased boning to the inside. And here's what the finished lining looks like. Once this was done, I moved on to the outer layer. First thing I did was cut out all the pattern pieces onto the interfacing. I then ironed these onto the crushed velvet, which will be what I will use for the main portion of this bodice. Once I finished ironing, I cut all the individual pieces out. After this, I sewed the side backs and side fronts together. Once this was done, I sewed the middle back to the center back and then the side back to the middle back. Now for the front of the bodice itself, I ended up using some of this brocade that my grandmother gave me, and I cut it a little bit narrower than the blue velveteen. Once that was done, I used this old table runner I had and cut a similar piece out, but just made it slightly narrower so you could see a little bit of the brocade. Now for the details, so I first used this velveteen ribbon, then I used this trim that I took off the table runner. Then I used this gold cord I actually found from gift bags. And then I used this 2010s era statement necklace and broke it apart to use the gems to decorate the bodice. And then I went ahead and basted the red to the blue. Now that I've got this piece done, I'm gonna go ahead and trim it. Once I finished trimming, I sewed the side fronts to the center of the bodice. Here's what I have so far, and I sewed a top seam on each just to smooth the edges over. I then added the gold panel to the bodice. And now it's time to trim. And here is the bodice fully trimmed.
I'm gonna go ahead and sew these together.
Instead of the starch collar you see in the original Snow White movie, I decided to add my little flair to it by doing lace around the top of the bodice instead.
Kind of like that.
Here's the lining on top of the bodice, and now I'm going to go ahead and sew them together. Now that it's done, I went ahead and flipped it out, and now I'm going to sew a handful of finishing seams. In the original pattern, there wasn't a full shoulder strap piece, so I had to add a panel of this velvet to finish the seams off so I could add sleeves. I then went ahead and sewed the sleeves to the bodice. After this, I broke apart the necklace.
Here's kind of what I was intending to do, but I ran into a problem where the pieces are so brittle they would break, and now I don't have attachments, so I guess I will be hot gluing these.
I also ended up adding some pearls and some mini rhinestones as well, but that's the end of the bodice, so let's move on to the skirt.
So now we are at one of my favorite parts, which is draping the skirt. The pattern I'm using for the skirt is 9713 by Simplicity, option C, which is this one. And I did want to include these like drapey things. They're called drapes in the pattern, but I know there's a more technical historical term with that. I am using this gold for the main body of the skirt. For those drapes, I'm going to be using the remnant blue fabric I used for the sleeve and this other blue material that's shiny to put underneath. So let's go ahead and cut them out. So if you see, we've kind of run into a little bit of a problem because the pattern pieces overlap. And so I'm going to see if folding it lengthwise will make it any better. Okay, of course it does that. I think I came up with a compromise. Either way I look at it, the fabric isn't going to hold both of the pattern pieces. So I think what I'm going to do is cut the front panel a little bit wider, and then I will cut the side back and back panels a little bit slimmer. So here is our front panel, and I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can use the remaining fabric to go ahead and cut the back pieces. So here's what the skirt looks like pinned on the dress form, and I'm gonna go ahead and sew up the side seams. After that, I think I'll gather this up, and then we can go ahead and start working on the drapes. I did end up deciding, instead of using a zipper like the pattern suggested, that I would just sew up the sides of the skirt and leave about 6 inches of gappage on either side, so I would be able to tie it around my waist as loose or as tight as I would want it. After this, I ended up creating a waistband for either side, sewed them to the top to clean the edges off, hemmed these sides up so they were also clean, and then I added this gross grain ribbon to the side to use as waistband. After that was done, I moved on to the drapes. Now originally, the pattern suggests that you sew the drapes to the skirt itself, but I didn't like that idea because it would make it difficult for me to get on. So I used the same drapes from the pattern, but I decided to make them a little bit longer and a little bit wider so they would look more like drapes you would see historically. With Venetian and masquerade ball costumes, there's a lot of ruffling involved to trim off the sides. So, because I have an exceptional knack for making things extremely overcomplicated, I'm using this sheer fabric, so it is going to be ruffled like that. Underneath that fabric, I had this gold sheet, and I went ahead and cut a good strip of it, so that is going to go underneath. And then on top of it, I cut all these red strips, and I'm going to fold them in half and make a ruffle go on top here like this. I have this white ribbon that I'm going to stick in the center of the ruffle. So I went ahead and sewed all of the red ruffle together, and now what I'm going to do is fold each side in and sew like such, and then my plan is to smush this and gather it into a ruffle. Okay, so now I've sewn all the blue together, and I'm going to go ahead and form it into ruffles. And then I will meet back and show you all the ruffles sewn together. Okay, so I finished all the ruffles here. So we have the blue one, and then we have the red here, and we have the gold. But I did forget to mention that I cut a strip all the way down of kind of just this like gold. So I would have that in the front to kind of match the gold of the skirt. I'm gonna go ahead and layer these all together and attach them. This is what the ruffling looks like right now. I think it's turned out amazing, and so all I have to do is to attach the white ribbon, and we're done. So I'm now going to pleat the top, hem up the far ends because I decided I'm not going to put ruffles on it because I've made a lot of ruffles, and I think it'll be okay because it'll be sitting in the back. So now I have to figure out the waistband. This is everything sitting on the dress form right now. The next thing I'm going to do is sew these drapes to a waistband. It's now fairly dark, and I am completely done with the skirt. However, when I was forming these drapey-like things, what I did notice is when it was on the skirt, there was a good bit of gappage. My best solution so far is to use the leftovers of this already pretty stripped apart table runner. And I think, definitely never thought I would be doing this on video, I think I should sew it between the gaps. And once I'm done with this, all I have left to do is hem the bodice and add the snaps. So let's go from there. Here is the completely finished skirt. Everything's been hemmed, and this is what I decided to do with the back. But I think I'm gonna add a bow as well, just because I'm not super thrilled with the idea of having just something flat. Other than that, I'm really happy how this skirt turned out. Anyway, so I think I will sew the bow and then finish up with the top, and that should be everything completed for this project. So
Here's that bow I talked about. Now let's move on to finishing details.
Okay, so now I'm at the point that I'm really ready to be done with this bodice, and she's kind of been just sitting here for about a week now. And so my lazy boat way of doing things is snaps. The pattern calls for grommets. The problem is the grommets I have are pretty cheap, and they're not going to do the quality job I want on this corset. The other thing is I am also slightly scared to cut holes in this gorgeous velvet without making severe mistakes. And so the cheat I have done whenever I run into this kind of situation is to just use snaps. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fold this over with the interfacing, make sure it's clean on both sides, and then add snaps and go from there. I sewed all the snaps on, and I made sure to test it. And I think what the problem is because the thread I use happened to be thicker than I would normally use for the snaps, because the last couple projects, some of the snaps have come off after wearing the pieces a couple times. I'm going to go ahead and add a hook and eye closure to the top, to the middle, just like in a couple places, just to keep it from falling out, because I will be walking through Venice in this.
Now once that was completed, I went ahead and made some binding out of some leftover velveteen, which I then added to the corset.
So here is the finished bodice.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching. In the last couple months, I've gained a lot of new subscribers, and it means the world to me. If you did enjoy this video, please like or subscribe, or even if you really enjoyed it, please share it with other people. I love showing people what I do. It really means the world to me. The project is now completely finished, and I'm going to go ahead and take you to Venice to show you the final result, and I am really excited. This is one of the coolest things I've ever made. Let's go!